The NFL draft. Now, Grant said, whoa, the NFL draft. You guys just got done the Super Bowl. My goodness here. We got free agency coming up. You got the draft. You got OTAs. You got training camp. And then away you go into football season once again. But I'm always intrigued by the draft, and particularly this year, because we have a lot of hot topics to hit. But if we take a look, Davis, and you say, all right, what's the draft order here just to get people refreshed? The top 10 goes as follows: Bears, Commanders, Patriots, Cardinals, Chargers, Giants, Titans, Falcons, Bears, and the New York Jets coming up in that 10 spot here. Let's start right off the top, because the Chicago Bears made one of the better trades you're going to see in NFL history for getting an extra number one draft pick, which turns out to be the number one overall draft pick because of how bad the Carolina Panthers are. So let's start right here at this spot. We'll get to the odds on who should be the quarterback. But Davis, I want to ask you, what should the Bears be doing with that top pick? Trading it away, drafting a quarterback, going with Fields. There's so many options for the Bears. Talk to me about that here.
All right, well, I'll tell you what the nerds say they should do. And I'm still trying to decide if I agree with this or not. The nerds think they should open the trade lines with the Commanders and be like, you really want Caleb Williams? You this is your guy? All right, let's trade from 2 to 1, because from sort of like an analytical perspective, Caleb Williams is definitely better than Drake May, but not so much better that if the Commanders were willing to give you, full Jimmy Johnson trade sheet value to go from 2 to 1, that you would turn it down. I think, and which I think is totally defendable and reasonable. Anyone who could tell you right now, I know for sure Caleb Williams is going to be Patrick Mahomes, and I know for sure that Drake May is going to be, Mitch Trubisky, right? There's just no one can know that right now. My opinion is that Caleb Williams he's probably the best quarterback prospect, I would say, since Lawrence, maybe Luck. Like Lawrence, people do kind of forget that Lawrence really tapered down in performance the last 2 years at Clemson. Everyone remembers that true freshman season. The thing that people would argue is that, they should actually just trade out of the pick entirely, not take a quarterback and run back with Fields the other year. I think that would be like about as much as you could mismanage a franchise as possible. The idea that the Bears, with this draft bounty that they got from the Carolina Panthers, they can turn themselves into the San Francisco 49ers, where you have this amazing offensive line and you draft a great defensive player and you have the best wide receivers. You already have DJ Moore and you sign another one and you do this and they have all this cap space. I mean, you got to get so lucky, honestly, on so many different decisions to build a roster like the 49ers have, where you can kind of elevate a quarterback who's good, but maybe not the greatest of the great. The easiest way to elevate yourself from an okay team to the best team, Donnie, you know it. It's changing your fortunes at quarterback, right? The Eagles, your team, they had Carson Wentz. They're scuffling. They're losing playoff games. That everyone's yelling at each other on the sidelines. You get Jalen Hurts, and all of a sudden you're winning the division every single year, or competing to win the division. The Kansas City Chiefs win the division all the time, but they looked at themselves in the mirror and said, we got a good quarterback, but what if we had a great quarterback? Let's get Patrick Mahomes. I think the Bears, honestly, if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm sitting in his chair, I'm not taking calls. I'm not doing nothing. I'm sitting on the clock, and I'm selecting Caleb Williams with the first pick in the 2024 NFL draft.
It's exactly the way the thought process should be here, because once you find your franchise guy, everything else then after that, Davis, does fall into place. I used to always joke about like an NHL team. If you know what, we're floundering out here. You know what I'm going to do? Let's just say there's 10 rounds in the NHL draft. Every year I'm going to draft 10 goalies, because once I find my superstar franchise goalie, everything else can fall into place behind it. And if you are the Chicago Bears, you're so right about this. Yes, they can draft the best defensive end coming out of college football, and he could be a very good player. The best linebacker, the best cornerback, the best wide receiver. But if you don't have that quarterback that can go toe-to-toe with a guy like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes, it's not going to work out. And if you equate it, go back and ask the franchises. I used to always do this with the Green Bay Packers, right? Didn't always want to spend a lot of money in free agency to help the wide receiver position. But I used to always joke saying, if you ask the Green Bay Packers, who wound up with prime-time Aaron Rodgers when he was playing well and healthy, if they would have given up knowing they could get Aaron Rodgers, a first-round draft pick every single year, knowing they'd have Aaron Rodgers, they would do it. Ask the Kansas City Chiefs right now, knowing what they know. Yes, they did trade up for Patrick Mahomes, didn't give up a ton to get him because he wasn't a number one overall pick. But if you ask the Kansas City Chiefs fans right now, hey, you know what? knowing what you know about Patrick Mahomes, would you forfeit your first-round draft pick every year for 15 years knowing you'd have Mahomes? Absolutely, you would do it because of how good he is. So for the Chicago Bears to say, let's run it back with Fields and it doesn't work out, and you pass on Caleb Williams, who goes to another franchise and dominates, you will never live that down as a city, as a fan, and as a general manager. Which now, let me ask you this next question as we look at the draft. The top 5 teams, right? Bears, Commanders, Patriots, Cardinals, and Chargers. For your money here, when do we see a position outside of quarterback get drafted? What spot, Davis, is that going to come from?
Ultimately, I think the Patriots are going to trade down from that 3rd pick and let another team trade up. Could be the Broncos, could be the Raiders. Like, I don't know what team is going to do it, but I think some team is either going to fall in love with Jayden Daniels or some team is going to fall in love with J.J. McCarthy. I've already heard the J.J. McCarthy actually might be the best quarterback in the class buzz or whatever. I don't buy that in any way, shape, or form. Now, J.J. McCarthy might be good. I mean, like I'm not a high-level scout. I'm not going to say. But Caleb Williams and Drake May are like the guys here. I think the 4th pick, I mean, you could pretty much write it in that the Cardinals are just going to take Marvin Harrison Jr. I would be very surprised, actually, if the Patriots took Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, I think the Patriots sitting and taking Jayden Daniels is more likely than them sitting and taking Marvin Harrison Jr. And the Chargers, I think, are... You heard it here first. I think they're going to take Brock Bowers. I think maybe Joe Alt, the tackle, but I think that you kind of look at Harbaugh and like what really matters to him.
Yep.
And I don't know. It just kind of feels and they got 32-year-old Keenan Allen who's injured. You got Mike Williams coming off the knee. They took Quentin Johnson last year. Looks like one of the biggest first-round busts at wide receiver in recent memory. Harbaugh wants to hit the ground running. I don't think he wants to come in and have Justin Herbert tossing the ball to Josh Palmer. I don't think that is what he is envisioning. I think Bowers seems like a pretty strong pick there. Now, that has not been mocked very often. Most people have them going with an offensive tackle there. But I think, and by the way, just in general, as we go through this first round, there's going to be like a startling number of offensive skill position players that go in the first round. I think it's going to be one of our heaviest offense drafts of like the last 5-6 years.
It's going to be interesting to watch it play out. I do agree because there's a lot of intrigue going into that top 5. But we posted a graphic up there for the odds to be the number 1 overall pick. And Caleb Williams is a minus 1,200 price, followed up there by Drake May at a plus 900, Marvin Harrison Jr., 16-1. Great football players, but it's probably going to be Caleb Williams. Now, the focus I want to ask you the question about here, Davis, is that number 2 overall pick. Because if you take a look at those odds here, Drake May is a minus 175 to be the number 2 overall pick, but close behind him is LSU's Jayden Daniels at a plus 200. I love this point in time where you're through the Senior Bowls, you're through the end of the college football season, and now you get into the draft day workouts because Drake May certainly is a talent, no doubt about it. But when Jayden Daniels runs that 40-yard dash and blazes a trail, is there a chance, Davis, in your mind that Jayden Daniels could actually be number 2 overall when it's all said and done?
Yeah. I think it is sort of trending in that direction. We just have gotten so much steam. And if you look at Drake May's final season at UNC, it definitely, it was a very good season, but it also was not as good as his sophomore season. Fewer touchdowns, more interceptions. North Carolina did not have as impressive as a season. Lost to North Carolina State, lost to Clemson, lost to Georgia Tech. Just from a results perspective, the guy who did himself the most favors at quarterback was definitely J.J. McCarthy in his final season. And Penix, up into a point, it's so interesting. Penix was like a guy who was going to go day 3. He was going to be the next Ryan Nassib, but then was so good in the 2 Oregon games, and then was really good in the first college football playoff, and then really bad in the final college football playoff. And he's old, and he's been so injured. I think, me personally, I would be surprised if Penix and Nix end up being first-round picks. They're like 23 and 24 years old. It's just like Bo Nix's first career start came against Justin Herbert. That's how old Bo Nix is. He was going up against Herbert, who's already on his second contract in the NFL. this is why I'm out on Jayden Daniels. Not out. I am lower than the market on Jayden Daniels. One, I'm pretty familiar with Jayden Daniels. I've watched a ton of him play. His junior season at Arizona State, all right, he's 21 years old. Like, that would be the age that Anthony Richardson was in the NFL last season. He goes 10 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He's like effective as a runner, but he's not Lamar Jackson as a runner. You know, he's a good runner. And then even his first season at LSU, it was a good season. It was a better season than he had his final year at Arizona State. But we really did not see him become a guy who was deserving of being a first-round pick until he was 22 and a half years old at LSU. And by the way, throwing to the second best wide receiver in the class and another guy, Brian Thomas Jr., who's maybe going to be a first-round pick, but definitely going to be a top 50 pick. So it just kind of like, it's hard to analyze those guys. You really want to stretch your memory back. We've had Joe Burrow throwing to the generational wide receivers and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. But do you remember when Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry and Jeremy Hill were the skill position players at LSU? What happened then? Zach Mettenberger. There's a name. There's a blast from the past. Zach Mettenberger ended up being a first-round pick throwing to those guys. And guess what? It was a big mistake to take Mettenberger in the first round throwing to those guys. They elevated how good he actually was. I'm not saying Jayden Daniels is Zach Mettenberger. I think he's much better than that. But I probably would not be trading up to select Daniels. Now, if I was the Broncos and I'm just like lost in the wilderness and I got nothing and I'm on the clock and he's there, yeah, that I think makes a lot of sense because, again, is what we were talking about with the Bears. You don't have a franchise until you have the quarterback, really. Same thing with McCarthy. I actually think there's a good argument to be made that McCarthy is maybe the third best quarterback in the class. You know, you'd have to do a lot of research and you'd have to be pretty confident in your film grades because he just was not asked to do that much at Michigan. I know that there are already people who are really into JJ McCarthy, who say like he could be the best quarterback in the class. The flopping of 3 and 4 between Daniels and McCarthy, you could convince me either way.
By the way, let me ask you this question. Number 4 right now in the draft order is the Arizona Cardinals. Jonathan Gannon, head coach, defensive guy. Now, they say they have their franchise quarterback. If one of these guys does slip to 4, is there a chance that the Cardinals go quarterback? Because it's an interesting spot that they look at here because we like to believe that maybe they already have their guy in Kyler Murray, but there's always rumors swirling around. Could the Cardinals go quarterback at 4, or do they just go, you know what, best player on the board, it's a wide receiver, go ahead, Kyler, get after it?
You know, I think had they gotten the number 1 pick or the number 2 pick, you actually could have talked me into it, of them being like, you know what, let's actually just figure this out. When you have the number 4 pick and you're looking at the 3rd or 4th best quarterback, Kyler Murray is owed $51 million per year for the next 4 years with no out in his contract. I don't think you can do it for Jayden Daniels.
Draft talk. We'll have more of that later. You know, we're going to go next to football, but it's not American football. Find out next on the Early Line.